Hi there, this is Love Johar. Thank you so much for tuning into this channel and thank you so much for watching this video. If you are a beginner and you're not able to understand anything about the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023, this video is very important because here in this video, we will cover in depth about why is it so important for India, how do you implement it, how is it different from the other acts that we already have, what is privacy, okay, each and everything that is mentioned there along with complete details so that you can have complete understanding about the implementation and what will happen if you will not comply with this Digital Personal Data Protection Act. Okay, so please make sure you watch this video very carefully. So this is first of all the first and foremost data protection privacy law in India. There was no other privacy law before this. This has been introduced for the first time, and it is applicable to both the residents of India, okay, whoever who is living in India, okay, for the individuals, and it is also applicable to all the companies as well. So individuals as well as the companies who are operating in India both need to understand this law. Okay, very important. So what is this law and what it talks about is it is mainly created to protect the personally identifiable information, which is also known as PII. We will also discuss in detail what is PII, what is personally identifiable information. So for now, just understand that it is meant to protect the personally identifiable information of an individual, okay, who is living in India, who is a part of India, okay. Now, what is privacy? Privacy is protecting a person's personal information, okay, because if you will not protect a person's personal information, people will actually steal personal data, okay. And why do people steal personal data is because they sell it on the dark web. You must be getting calls from different insurance companies, from different loan providers, from different telemarketing agencies these days. So actually these companies, in order to market their products, in order to market their you know uh, services, they use this personal data. For example, your phone numbers, your names. So these are being sold to these companies so that they can get the most out of them. So you need to understand first of all, what is data principle and what is data subject, because this will be repeated multiple times in this video. So you need to have a clarity around what is a data principle and what is a data subject. So data principle and data subject is nothing but you and me. For example, whoever has a personal data in India, the entity is called as data principal or the data subject. For example, my name, my phone number. So I am the data principal. I am the data subject here. Okay. So the DPDP Act is basically for protecting our personal data. Okay. Whose personal data? The data principals and data subjects. Personal data. People who are living in India. Okay. Definition of personal data. So, as per this act, personal data means any data about any individual who is identifiable by or in relation to such data. Okay. It is like a digital fingerprint that directly or indirectly points to an individual. Okay. For example, how to differentiate between directly and indirectly would be directly you can point to me by my name, by my address, by my phone number. Indirectly, you may identify me as a male, as an individual who is residing in a particular location. So any sort of direct or indirect relevance, or uh, you know uh, representation of individuals personal data is called a personal data. So how is it used by companies? So as I already mentioned, so companies use this data to enhance and personalize user experience, and for tailoring their services as per your preferences. Because why it is mentioned like that is because your cookies as well, for example, are being stored. So whenever you visit a similar website, you see the same product coming up again and again. So that's why companies use this personal data. Okay, that's why we will understand more in the upcoming slides why you have to now accept the cookies as well when you go to any site. Okay, so all this is covered in this video, so keep watching. So what are the key entities? So key entities in this case are data principals, as I already covered, data subjects. Now other thing to understand is data fiduciaries and data controller. Who are these entities, and what is a significant data fiduciary? So let us understand that. So data principal, data fiduciary, and significant data fiduciary. So data principals already covered individuals whose personal data are collected and processed as per the DPDP bill. And data fiduciary is nothing but the company, the entity that alone or jointly with others determine the purpose and the means of processing of the personal data. Okay. So any organization that alone or jointly with other organizations determine the purpose and the means of processing personal data. So the primary organization in this case will be called the data fiduciary. Okay, and if they afterwards they outsource the work, the processes to another third party, organizations, then they will not come under data fiduciary. Okay, so you have to understand that. Now, what is significant data fiduciary? So significant data fiduciary is a very new term, so you have to understand that organizations that process large volumes of sensitive data sets, okay, will be declared by the government as a significant data fiduciary. Okay, you have to understand that where is large volume of personal data first of all, and sensitive personal data. Two things you have to understand here. Okay, so how to determine whether you are falling under significant data fiduciary or not? So factors that determine a significant data fiduciary include volume and sensitivity of the data that is being processed, risk of harm to the data principal in case of any breach of that personal data, impact on the sovereignty and integrity of India if the personal data gets breached, and risk of electoral democracy and security of the state and public order. So, if all these factors are falling under the personal data that you are processing, then of course you fall under significant data fiduciary. So, what is a data processor now? As I already mentioned in the previous slide, that a company who actually, you know, determines the purpose why personal data has been processed and the means how it is processed is called as data fiduciary. But the company, as I already mentioned before, who will take on this process from the primary company, in this case from the data fiduciary, in order to get this work done or in order to support this, is called as data processor. Okay, because actually they are processing the data, not the data fiduciary. Hope you understand that. Now after that, you have to understand what is data processor. So data processor is an entity that processes digital personal data on behalf of a data fiduciary. Okay, let's say you outsource some data to some third party. You are getting some work done, you are transferring the personal data. So that third party in this case is known as data processor. We will take real practical examples as well, so that you get this clarity. Okay, now what is the consent manager? So the consent manager in this case is a data principal and data fiduciary to give, manage, review, and withdraw consent. So consent managers would assist. So they are the middlemen. Consent manager is an entity that will be registered with the Data Protection Board of India, which will act as a single point of contact for the data principals to give, manage, review, or withdraw their consent through an accessible, transparent, and suitable platform. Okay, so two things to understand for the consent managers is, number one, this is an entity that will be registered with the Data Protection Board of India. It will act as a single point of contact for the data principals. Okay, in case they are not able to reach to the data fiduciaries in order to give, manage, review, or withdraw their consent through an accessible, transparent, and suitable platform. That is why they are in place. Okay, hope you understand that. A data processor, we have already discussed, is an agent or a service provider to the data fiduciary. Okay, we have already discussed that, so that they can help the data fiduciary in order to process the personal data. Okay, now example, let's take a real life example so that you can understand all these terms. E-commerce business. Okay, let us take Amazon as an example. E-commerce business, again, this is an example. Okay, so Amazon, let's say, hires a delivery company to when you place an order on Amazon to get your items delivered. So Amazon, of course, has third party suppliers. So Amazon gives your contact information to, let's say, third party delivery company, the company who actually delivers the products. So Amazon, of course, would be sharing your name, your phone number, your address to the delivery company. So in this case, Amazon itself, again, I am taking an example. Amazon itself is a data fiduciary. Okay, data fiduciary, because you are data subject, you are data principal in this case, you are the user who orders from the Amazon. Amazon is the data fiduciary because Amazon is using your information for your order fulfillment and for enhancing your future shopping experience. Now, data processor in this case is the delivery company for Amazon. Okay, why? Because they are handling data subjects data for a specific purpose, in this case for order delivery. Okay, hope you understand that. Now, the other thing to understand about this act is where this is applicable and where this act is not applicable. Are there any exemptions where the act is not applicable? Let us discuss that. So DPDP Act applies to all the data, whether originally online or offline, and later digitized in India, as I already mentioned. Additionally, the Act applies to the processing of digital personal data beyond India's border, particularly when it encompasses the provision of goods or services to individuals within the Indian territory. Okay, so two things to understand here. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023 applies to the processing of personal data collected in India in digital form. Okay, that is one thing. Now you must say, if it is in a paper based form, then what should be done? If data is in a non digital or paper based document, but then later on, if you are scanning the data or writing that same document in a Word document, you're copying the data into a digital form, then the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023 again applies to it. Okay, so you have to understand that. So apart from that, the act also applies to the outside territory of India. So let's say if the entity is operating from any other country who is based outside of India, so and they are offering you goods and services because you are residing in India, as I already mentioned in the beginning of the act, to the data subjects or data principals who are in India. Okay, so it also applies to those entities as well. Okay, so if you are getting any goods or services from them who are outside from India, any organizations, they also have to be aware and apply this act to them as well, so that they follow it properly. So as I mentioned, the entity then will have to follow the provisions of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023 if they are offering any goods or services to the data principals or data subjects in India. Okay. Now, the other thing to understand is what are the exemptions under the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023. So, when data is processed for any personal or domestic purpose, okay, then this act is not applicable. Okay. For example, let's say you take a cab. Okay, you book a cab, so you take let's say Uber or Ola, whatever app you use. You are giving the person your location, your phone number. So this is your personal use. Okay, this is your domestic purpose. So then in that case, because you are voluntarily, by your choice, you are giving out your data for your own personal domestic purpose. Okay. And similarly, when data is made publicly available, so when you yourself share your photographs, your family photographs, uh, you know your vacation photographs on social media, or because of any legal obligations by the data principal, or because of any sort of legal obligations that you might have to fulfill. So you provide your Aadhaar card details in order to fulfill any legal obligations. Then also, if you are voluntarily by choice doing it, or because of any legal obligations, if you are doing it, then this act is not applicable. Okay. So where the processing is necessary for enforcing any legal rights or any legal claims, for example any judicial functions, then also this act is not applicable. Okay. Now, what are the grounds for processing of personal data? So there are two grounds actually for processing of personal data. Number one is consent based framework. So what it means is a consent request has to be made along with a privacy notice. You have to understand that there are two things to it. A consent request has to be made to the individual for processing their personal data along with a privacy notice. Now, what all privacy notice will have, we will also discuss. The other is non-consent based framework, okay, which already we have discussed. What are the uses where the exemptions are there, okay, legitimate uses. So now let us try to understand what is a privacy notice, because this term now has come. So in privacy notice, so first of all, what is privacy notice? So in privacy notice, you inform the individual, okay, any individual for which you are actually processing their, personal data. What personal data are you collecting? What is the purpose for which this data is being collected by you as a data fiduciary? So this has to be done by the data fiduciary. Okay, let us also define the roles and responsibilities as well, so that we understand it properly. So this privacy notice has to be sent by the data fiduciary. So what personal data is being collected? What is the purpose for which this data is collected? Clear information on how can the data subject withdraw their consent in case they want to should be actually written in the privacy notice. Okay. Clear information on grievance redressal mechanism. For example, if you are having any complaints, or you want to raise any issues or concerns regarding your personal data being collected, what are the grievance redressal mechanisms in that case? Details on how the individual can reach the data protection board and file a complaint in case they have any issues should also be clearly mentioned. You need to educate the data principal on what rights they can exercise and how they can sue the data fiduciary, that will be you in in this case, in cases where there is any breach under this law. Okay, so this has to be clearly laid out. That's why this privacy notice is very important. So now, in which language you have to define this is, you can define this as either in English or in any other 22 languages as defined in the Constitution of India, in a regional language as well, as per the respective data subjects where they are located. Okay, so now a question comes in, where somebody can say, in the case of historical personal data, do you need fresh consent? No, because person has already shared their data to you historically, so you do not have to ask for a new consent, but you need to send your privacy notice to the individual so that they are aware of what data you have on them and all the other things that we have already mentioned in the privacy notice. Okay. Now, what is a consent request? So, consent of data principle has to be specific, informed, unconditional, and unambiguous with clear affirmative action by the data subject and limited for specific purpose. For example, if you are, let's say, I'll take the Amazon example again. If you are taking the data subject's personal information for delivery of goods, then it should only be used for the delivery of goods only, for that specific purpose only, and not for any other purpose. Okay, so you have to be clear there. So when you collect and process children's data, you must obtain verifiable parental consent prior to collection of children's data. This is again one important point that has been introduced in the DPDP Act. So along with that, you have to provide contact details of the data protection officer for significant data fiduciaries. Okay, because they have to appoint a data protection officer. If you are a significant data fiduciary, you have to have a data protection officer or any authorized person for responding to communication from data principals for exercising their rights. Okay, so that they know who they can reach to in case of any issues that they have, or if they want to revoke their consent or for any other matter, for example. So what is the consent now? Because we have discussed a lot about consent, but what is a consent? Okay, you should be thinking about that. So consent request should be free, specific, informed, unconditional, unambiguous. It should be given by a very clear affirmative action by the data subject. It should be given in a clear positive action by the data principal. Okay, should be limited to a specific purpose only, already as discussed, should have the details of the data protection officer so that they can raise any issues. Withdrawing the consent, this is very important, should also be as easy as when you obtain the consent. Okay, so you have to understand that the data subject, the data principal should be able to withdraw the consent as well, and it should be as easy when you obtain the consent. So, what are the legitimate use cases when no consent is needed? So, as already discussed, where the data principal has voluntarily provided the personal data, no consent is needed. When you are using personal data for the purpose of employment or for safeguarding the employer from the loss of liability, for example, a company, when they are trying to use the personal data for maintaining confidentiality, intellectual property of the company, then no consent is needed. Okay, for any health emergencies, for disaster, or for public order. You do not need a consent in these cases. Now, what are the rights of the data principal? Okay, so data principal, the data subjects for which you are actually using their personal data, they have some rights in this case. The right to get information about personal data being processed. They should know what all personal data are you processing. Okay, what all personal data do you have on them, and they should know about complete personal data that you have on them and how you're processing it. The right to have data corrected and erased. So the personal data that you might have on them is not correct. So let's say the address has changed, their location has changed, or their phone number has changed, so they have the right to give you the correct data. They should be processed for that as well. And erasure as well. For example, as I said, they do not want you to hold their data, so you have to make sure that the data is no longer there. So they can request for that as well. Okay. The right to have data corrected and erased, the right to withdraw consent at any time, as I already say covered before. You can request for consent, but they can withdraw the consent as well. Okay. The right to redress of grievances. Let's say there are any issues that they have, any complaints that they have complete right, and they should have complete details to where they can do that. So in case of any loss of life, in the event of death or incapacity, they have the right to appoint someone else on their behalf to exercise all these rights in their behalf. Okay. Now, as an entity also, you have some rights that we will cover maybe in the next video, because this video is already going very long. uh, we have cross border data transfers as well. So uh, there are, let's say, if there are transfer requirements of the data, fiduciaries can transfer personal data to other countries, unless notified and restricted by the central government. So let's say if you need to transfer personal data, then there are provisions for that as well. So penalties, I think this is very important to discuss penalties. So data fiduciaries, as I already said, are the companies who are actually processing the personal data, and are describing the reasons why they are processing it and the means as to how they are processing it. They are liable to pay a penalty of up to 250 crore in case of any breach, where obligation is not uh, done properly. There were If there are not proper reasonable security safeguards to prevent a personal data breach, then there could be fines up to 250 crore. Okay. So very huge amount, especially for any organization if they are working on a personal data. So I think now data fiduciaries have to understand what are the repercussions in case the data breach happens. The other thing is breach in observing the obligation to give the board or affected data principal notice of a personal data breach. So let's say if there is a breach, and the data principal or the personal uh, data protection board is not being informed, have not been sent a notice of that, then in the non-compliance, again, penalty of 200 crore rupees. uh, After that, you have breach in observance of additional obligations in related to the children, which I already covered. So then again, it's a fine of 200 crore rupees. Breach of any other provisions of this act, okay, or the rules made thereunder, non-compliance shall lead to a penalty of 50 crore rupees. So I think you need to watch this video very carefully, and you need to understand the criticality of processing personal data if you are an organization. Along with that, I would say if you are also an individual, you should also watch this video again if you are not clear on any subject that I have covered here, because as an individual also you need to understand why the personal data is so important, and why you should make sure that you know your rights, you understand your rights that the government has given you in order to access your personal data. So both ways, I think this video is very important, so you have to make sure you watch this video very carefully. And as always, in case of any comments, please feel free to add in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye.